The Vorthan Empire had conquered 17 star systems in the past century, each species falling within months of first contact. Their massive dreadnoughts would arrive in orbit, deploy atmospheric suppressors, and watch as civilizations crumbled under the weight of impossible gravity fields. The pattern never varied: fear, surrender, enslavement. Admiral Zektar stood on the bridge of his flagship Dominion's Edge, watching the third planet of the Sol system rotate slowly beneath them. The blue marble looked deceptively peaceful, swirled with white clouds and vast oceans. Intelligence reports indicated a young species called humans had achieved basic spaceflight, but remained confined to their home system. Perfect slaves for the Empire's expanding mineral operations. "Begin atmospheric suppression," Zektar commanded, his 6 arms manipulating the command console with practiced efficiency. "Set gravity multipliers to 3 times planetary norm. That should break their will within hours." The massive ships positioned themselves in perfect formation around Earth. Energy beams lanced downward, creating invisible fields that would make every step feel like carrying 3 people on their backs. Cities would empty as humans collapsed under their own weight. Governments would fall as leaders became too weak to function. Within days, they would be begging for mercy, but something was wrong. Lieutenant Velshaw monitored the surface readings, her bioluminescent patches flickering in confusion. "Admiral, the humans, they're not responding as predicted." "Explain," Zektar growled, his mandibles clicking with irritation. "Sir, our scanners show they've adapted their routines. They're moving differently, but they're still functioning. Some are even maintaining military formations." Zektar's eyes narrowed. In their conquest of the Kalari, the bat-like species had been completely incapacitated within 2 hours. The crystalline Zephyrians had surrendered after just 40 minutes. Increase the multiplier to 5 times normal gravity. The energy output from their ships intensified. On Earth's surface, the crushing weight should have been unbearable. Yet the human military bases continued transmitting. Traffic still moved through their cities, albeit slowly. Children still played in their recreational areas, though their games had changed to accommodate the heavier conditions. "Admiral," Velshaw's voice carried a note of disbelief. "They're adapting their infrastructure. Reports indicate they're calling this an extreme gravity training exercise and sharing techniques through their global communication networks." Dr. Sarah Chen stumbled but caught herself against the laboratory wall. The crushing weight made every movement exhausting, but her mind raced with possibilities. Around the world, humans were responding to the crisis not with panic, but with that peculiar trait that had carried them through ice ages, plagues, and world wars: stubborn adaptability. In military bases, soldiers practiced low crawls and modified their equipment. In hospitals, staff developed new procedures for treating patients under extreme conditions. Children too weak to run instead played strategy games, their young minds learning to conserve energy while maintaining alertness. But it was the underground networks that truly surprised the aliens. Subway systems became highways for human movement. Natural caves were converted into command centers. The humans weren't just enduring the impossible gravity, they were weaponizing their own planet's topology against it. 3 days into the suppression, Zektar received reports that shattered his understanding of conquest. Human industrial production had actually increased. Their leaders had declared the situation a global emergency fitness program, and productivity metrics were climbing as humans worked in shorter, more efficient bursts. "This is impossible," he hissed. "Deploy ground forces. We'll crush them directly." The first Vorthon dropships descended toward major population centers. Each carried 50 elite warriors, beings who had pacified countless worlds through superior technology and physical prowess. They expected to find broken, cowering humans ready for immediate subjugation. Instead, they found prepared defenders. The humans had been busy during those 3 days. They'd studied the alien ships, analyzed their energy signatures, and reverse-engineered countermeasures with a speed that defied logic. Crude but effective electromagnetic pulse devices disabled Vorthon weapons. The improvised armor protected human soldiers, who had trained their entire lives under Earth's gravity and now moved like lightning, compared to the invaders struggling under the artificial. Field Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez led his squad through the rubble of downtown Miami, using hand signals to coordinate their movement. The aliens were stronger and had better technology, but they moved like they were underwater. 3 days of extreme gravity training had turned every human soldier into a tactical advantage. "Remember," he whispered into his comm unit, "they can't turn off the gravity field without affecting their own troops. Use that." Above them, Zektar watched his ground forces suffer their first casualties in over 50 years. Human tactics were unlike anything in their databases. These beings fought with a creativity and desperation that turned every urban environment into a death trap for his warriors. But what truly unnerved him was the communication intercepts. The humans weren't just fighting, they were learning. Every engagement was recorded, analyzed, and broadcast across their networks. Within hours, successful tactics were being employed on every continent. One transmission particularly disturbed him. Day 3 update from the Scientific Coalition. "We've successfully reverse-engineered basic principles of their gravity manipulation technology. First prototype expected within the week. All research departments are sharing data freely. Recommendation: continue current resistance protocols while preparing for technological parity." The Admiral's 4 hearts began beating faster. No species had ever attempted to understand Vorthan technology during an invasion. They either surrendered immediately or died trying to fight with primitive weapons. But these humans were doing something unprecedented. They were evolving their resistance in real time. As the first week concluded, Zektar faced a reality that challenged everything the Empire believed about conquest. The humans hadn't surrendered. They hadn't collapsed. Instead, they had turned his most powerful weapon into their training ground and were rapidly developing countermeasures to technologies that had taken the Vorthon Empire centuries to perfect. For the first time in his military career, Admiral Zektar began to question whether they had chosen the right target for their next expansion. The blue planet below continued its rotation, but the species inhabiting it had proven to be unlike anything they had encountered before. The real war, he realized with growing dread, was just beginning. Dr. Yuki Tanaka wiped sweat from her brow as she examined the captured Vorthon weapon for the 15th time that day. The International Research Facility in Switzerland had become humanity's most important location, where salvaged alien technology was dissected. With the focused intensity that had once split atoms and mapped genomes, the power source is unlike anything we've seen, she reported to the Global Science Council via encrypted quantum communication. But the principles, they're not magic. These beings simply approached physics from a different angle. Around the world, humans did what they had always done best when faced with impossible odds. They collaborated. The Chinese shared their materials science breakthroughs. The Americans contributed their manufacturing capabilities. Europeans provided theoretical frameworks while African researchers offered innovative applications. Even countries that had been enemies just weeks before now worked together with singular focus. Admiral Zektar watched this unprecedented cooperation with growing alarm. His intelligence officers reported massive resource redistribution across the human homeworld. Factories that once produced luxury goods now churned out military equipment. Universities had transformed into research bunkers. The entire species had shifted into what they called wartime economy, with a speed that defied his understanding of how civilizations functioned. Admiral, Communications Officer Thekra approached with obvious reluctance. "We're receiving transmissions from the human leadership. Surrender terms?" Zektar asked hopefully. "No, sir. They're demanding our surrender." The bridge fell silent. In 300 years of conquest, no species had ever made such a demand during the opening phase of invasion. Zektar's secondary arms twitched with nervous energy as he processed this impossible development. The transmission crackled to life, revealing a human female with steel-gray eyes and an expression that somehow conveyed both determination and pity. "I am Secretary General Maria Santos of the United Earth Government. We're prepared to offer your forces safe passage from our system if you leave immediately. This is your only warning." Zektar's laughter echoed through the bridge. "Transmit our response. Tell them they have 48 hours to surrender or we'll begin orbital bombardment." But even as he issued the threat, doubt gnawed at him. The humans had already survived 2 weeks under conditions that should have broken them completely. Their rapid technological advancement suggested capabilities that Imperial analysts had somehow missed during their initial survey. On Earth's surface, the warning sparked not panic, but preparation. Human engineers had spent every waking hour studying the alien gravity technology, And their breakthrough came from an unexpected source: children's toys. A 10-year-old girl in Mumbai had noticed that magnetic levitation toys stopped working near the alien suppression fields, leading scientists to understand that the technology relied on localized space-time distortion. If they can bend space to increase gravity, Dr. James Wright explained to military leaders in an emergency briefing, then we can theoretically bend it in the opposite direction. The math is complex, but the principle is simple enough. The first human anti-gravity prototype was crude, a modified electromagnetic generator that created small pockets of reduced gravitational effect. It worked for only minutes before overheating. But those minutes proved the concept. Within days, every major industrial center was producing components for larger versions. Meanwhile, human military forces had adapted their tactics to something that terrified the Vorthan observers. Small units moved through underground networks, striking alien patrols with hit-and-run tactics before disappearing into subway systems and natural cave networks. The humans had turned their planet into a maze that favored defenders who knew every tunnel and hiding spot. Captain Sarah Mitchell led her team through the London Underground, each soldier carrying salvaged alien equipment alongside human weapons. They had learned to move in the heavy gravity field with efficiency that impressed even themselves. More importantly, they had learned to think like their enemy. The aliens coordinate through hierarchical command structures, she briefed her troops. Take out their squad leaders and the rest become confused. They're not used to independent thinking at the tactical level. Above ground, the orbital bombardment began exactly 48 hours after the ultimatum. Massive energy beams lanced down from the Vorthan fleet, targeting major population centers with enough force to vaporize mountains. But the beams struck empty targets. Evacuation procedures had moved millions of humans into underground shelters that their ancestors had originally built for nuclear war. Zektar watched the bombardment with growing frustration. Thermal imaging showed that human population centers were largely empty. Somehow they had anticipated the attack and moved their civilians to safety with military precision. Even more troubling, their industrial centers had been relocated underground where orbital weapons couldn't reach them. "Sir," Lieutenant Velshaw reported with barely controlled panic in her voice, "we're detecting massive electromagnetic signatures from multiple locations on the surface. The humans appear to be powering up something significant." The something turned out to be humanity's first successful gravity manipulation devices, crude compared to Vorthan technology, but effective enough to create localized fields that disrupted the aliens' atmospheric suppression systems. Across Earth, pockets of normal gravity began appearing as human resistance forces activated their improvised generators. But the real surprise came when these gravity fields began moving. The humans had mounted their devices on vehicles, creating mobile zones where their soldiers could fight at full effectiveness while alien forces struggled with the crushing weight they had imposed on the planet tank commander. Boris Petrov grinned as his modified vehicle rumbled through the streets of Moscow, the anti-gravity field generator humming behind him. Around his tank, Russian soldiers moved with their normal speed and agility, while Vorthan warriors stumbled under triple gravity. It was like watching giants turned into children, powerful but clumsy. "Target acquired," his gunner reported. "Alien dropship attempting to land." "Fire," Petrov commanded. The human-designed railgun powered by captured alien energy cells sent a tungsten projectile through the Vorthan dropship's hull. The vehicle exploded in a spectacular fireball that painted the Moscow skyline orange. Similar scenes played out across every continent. Human forces, once trapped under impossible gravity, now moved in bubbles of normal space-time while their oppressors suffered under their own weapon. The tables hadn't just turned, they had been completely flipped. In orbit, Admiral Zektar faced a reality that challenged everything the Empire believed about warfare. The humans hadn't just adapted to his most powerful weapons, they had learned to use those weapons against his own forces. Reports flooded in of Vorthan units pinned down by their own gravity fields while human soldiers danced around them with deadly efficiency. "Admiral," Thekira's voice carried desperation now, "Fleet Command is requesting status reports. The other conquered systems are monitoring our progress. If we fail here," Zektar understood the implication. The Empire's power rested on the myth of inevitable victory. If word spread that humans had not only resisted, but were actively winning against Imperial forces, it would inspire rebellion across 17 star systems. But as he watched another of his dropships fall to human weapons, Sektar began to suspect that keeping this conflict secret might already be impossible. The humans had proven themselves to be something unprecedented in the galaxy, a species that grew stronger under pressure rather than breaking. The Admiral stared at the blue planet below and realized that for the first time in Imperial history, they might be facing an enemy that couldn't be defeated through superior technology or overwhelming force. The humans were fighting with something far more dangerous than weapons. They were fighting with innovation, adaptation, and an apparently limitless capacity for growth under pressure. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source, intercepted Vorthan communications. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a linguistics professor turned codebreaker, had spent 3 weeks analyzing alien transmissions when she noticed something that changed everything. "They're scared," she announced to the emergency council meeting, not just concerned or frustrated, genuinely terrified. "Their command structure is breaking down because this has never happened before." General Harrison leaned forward in his chair, studying the translated communications scrolling across the screen. "What exactly are they saying?" "Listen to this," Elena played back a decoded transmission. "Admiral Sektar to Fleet Command. Request immediate reinforcements. Human resistance exceeds all projections. They are weaponizing our own technology faster than we can develop countermeasures. Recommend complete sterilization of system before contamination spreads." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The aliens weren't just struggling with human resistance, they were afraid that human innovation might spread to their other conquered worlds. Commander Liu Wei of the Chinese Space Force stood up, a dangerous smile spreading across his face. "If they're worried about contamination, then we give them contamination. We broadcast everything we've learned to every system they control." The plan that emerged was audacious even by human standards. Using captured Vorthan communication technology, they would transmit detailed instructions for anti-gravity generation, tactical manuals for resistance fighting, and most importantly, proof that the supposedly invincible empire could be defeated. Meanwhile, the war on Earth had evolved into something that horrified Vorthan military strategists. Human forces no longer simply reacted to alien movements, they anticipated them. Worse, they had begun taking the offensive. Colonel James Patterson led his strike team through the ruins of Chicago, each soldier equipped with a personal gravity manipulator and weapons that combined human engineering with alien technology. Their target was ambitious: capture a Vorthan command ship that had been grounded for repairs. "Remember the briefing?" he whispered into his comm. "These beings think in rigid hierarchies. Remove their command structure and they become lost. But be careful. Desperate aliens are still dangerous aliens." The assault began at dawn, with human forces creating coordinated gravity fields that threw the alien defenders into chaos. Vorthan warriors who had trained for combat in standard gravity found themselves unable to function when localized. Fields shifted between crushing weight and near weightlessness every few seconds. Inside the command ship, Sub-Admiral Krentok watched his tactical displays with growing horror. The humans weren't just winning individual battles, they were systematically dismantling his entire operational framework. Every weakness his forces revealed was immediately exploited across all fronts simultaneously. "How are they coordinating so effectively?" he demanded of his intelligence officer. "Sir, they appear to have a decentralized command structure that allows for rapid information sharing and independent decision-making at all levels. When one unit discovers something useful, the entire species knows within hours." Krentok's 4 eyes widened in disbelief. The Empire relied on strict hierarchical control to maintain order. The idea of allowing subordinates to make strategic decisions independently was not just foreign. It was terrifying. The command ship fell within 6 hours. More importantly, its capture gave humans access to complete Imperial databases, including detailed information about every conquered species and their current locations. The galaxy, it turned out, was full of civilizations waiting for hope. Dr. Tanaka stood before the massive alien communication array they had salvaged, her hands shaking slightly as she prepared to change galactic history. "Broadcasting to all Imperial territories," she announced. "This is Earth calling. We have broken the Vorthan Empire's gravity weapon. We are transmitting complete technical specifications and tactical manuals. Freedom is possible." The broadcast reached 17 star systems simultaneously. On the crystalline world of Zephyr Prime, Beings who had suffered under Imperial rule for 50 years suddenly learned that their oppressors were not invincible. In the cave networks of Kalari space, bat-like creatures discovered that the gravity fields that had broken their civilization could be turned into weapons against their captors. Admiral Zektar received reports of the broadcast within hours, and the blood drained from his primary face. How many systems received the transmission? All of them, sir. Communications Officer Thekra could barely speak. The humans somehow accessed our entire communication network. Every conquered world now has detailed instructions for resistance, but the nightmare was just beginning. Within days, reports flooded in of uprisings across the Empire. The Kalari had always been excellent tunnel fighters. With human anti-gravity technology, they became impossible to dislodge from their underground cities. The Zephyrians' natural ability to manipulate electromagnetic fields, combined with human engineering principles, created weapons that made Imperial technology look primitive. Most terrifying of all was the coordination. The humans had somehow created a galaxy-wide resistance network, with each species contributing their unique abilities to the collective fight for freedom. The Empire faced not just a rebellion, but an evolution of warfare that their rigid military doctrine couldn't comprehend. On Earth, the tide had turned completely. Human forces now controlled most major population centers, having driven Vorthon troops into isolated pockets where they struggled to maintain communication with their orbital fleet. The gravity suppressors that had once been weapons of conquest now served as training grounds for human soldiers who grew stronger and more adaptable with each passing day. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, now leading a mixed unit of human engineers and captured Vorthon technical specialists, worked on humanity's most ambitious project yet. If we can reverse engineer their faster-than-light communication, she explained to her team, we can coordinate resistance efforts across the entire galaxy in real time. The Vorthon technicians, who had initially refused to cooperate, now worked alongside their human captors with something approaching enthusiasm. They had witnessed something unprecedented, a species that didn't seek revenge against its conquered enemies, but instead offered them partnership in liberation. Your people, one of the aliens said to Chen in broken English. You fight not just for yourselves. That's right, Chen replied, not looking up from her work. We fight for everyone who's been told they're not strong enough to be free. In orbit, Admiral Zektar faced the impossible decision of whether to retreat or escalate. His fleet still possessed enough firepower to destroy Earth's biosphere, but reports from across the Empire made it clear that such an action would only inspire more resistance. The humans had already proven that Imperial technology could be defeated. Turning them into martyrs would make them infinitely more dangerous. Admiral, Lieutenant Velsha approached with obvious fear in her voice. We're receiving a transmission from Fleet Command. They're ordering us to withdraw immediately. Zektar's mandibles clicked in confused anger. Withdraw? We have the firepower to end this. Sir, the rebellion has spread to the core worlds. The Emperor himself is under siege on the Imperial capital. They need every ship for defense. The Admiral stared at the blue planet below, understanding finally dawning. The humans hadn't just defeated his invasion. They had sparked a galactic revolution that threatened the very foundation of the Empire. In trying to enslave one small world, they had awakened a force that might destroy everything they had built. As Vorthon ships began withdrawing from Earth orbit, humans across the planet looked up at the stars with new understanding. They were no longer alone in the galaxy, and they were no longer weak. They had become something far more dangerous than any empire could imagine, teachers of freedom in a universe that had forgotten how to fight for it. 3 months after the Vorthon fleet's retreat from Earth, Captain Maria Santos stood on the bridge of humanity's first interstellar warship. The vessel was a hybrid of human engineering and captured alien technology, built in the underground factories that had once hidden from orbital bombardment. Now those same facilities produced ships capable of faster-than-light travel. Approaching the Kalari system, Navigation Officer Kim reported, We're receiving multiple distress signals. The main screen flickered to life, showing a star system in chaos. 410 warships engaged in desperate combat with Kalari resistance forces that moved like ghosts through asteroid fields and planetary atmospheres. The bat-like aliens had taken human guerrilla tactics and evolved them into something uniquely their own. Open communications, Santos commanded. All frequencies. The response came immediately. a mixture of Kalari echolocation patterns and translated human tactical language. Human vessel, this is Wing Commander Shrika of the Free Kalari Coalition. We request immediate assistance. Imperial forces are attempting to retake our primary colony. Santos smiled grimly. This was exactly what they had hoped to find. Wing Commander, this is Captain Santos of the Earth Liberation Fleet. We're here to help. Transmitting tactical coordination protocols now. What followed was humanity's first joint operation with an alien resistance movement, and it revealed something that terrified Imperial observers throughout the galaxy. Humans didn't just fight for themselves, they fought better when working alongside others. Their natural adaptability allowed them to integrate seamlessly with Kalari aerial tactics, creating combined arms strategies that neither species could have developed alone. The battle for Kalari Prime lasted 18 hours and ended with the complete destruction of the Imperial garrison. More importantly, it established the template for what would become known across the galaxy as the Liberation Protocol. In the Imperial capital of Vorth Prime, Emperor Mekthar paced the length of his command chamber. All 6 of his eyes focused on the holographic displays showing the disintegration of his empire. Red markers indicated systems in open rebellion. Yellow showed worlds where Imperial control was contested. Green, representing loyal territory, had shrunk to less than half of what it had been just months before. How did one primitive world cause this? He demanded of his assembled advisors. Grand Admiral Yethron, veteran of 100 conquest campaigns, stepped forward with obvious reluctance. Your Imperial Majesty, our analysis suggests that humans possess qualities we never encountered in our previous conquests. They adapt rapidly, share knowledge freely, and most concerning of all, they inspire others to fight. Inspire? The Emperor's voice carried deadly menace. Slaves do not inspire. They obey or they die. That is precisely the problem, Majesty. Humans refuse to accept either option. They create a third choice: victory through innovation and cooperation. Every species they contact begins developing the same resistance patterns. The Emperor studied the tactical displays, watching real-time reports of Imperial defeats across multiple sectors. The humans had somehow weaponized the very qualities that made them unsuitable as slaves: their creativity, their stubborn independence, and their infuriating tendency to treat every setback as a learning opportunity. On the industrial world of Zephyr Prime, crystalline beings worked alongside human engineers to construct weapons that defied Imperial understanding. The Zephyrians' natural ability to manipulate electromagnetic fields, enhanced by human technological principles, had created shields that rendered Imperial energy weapons useless. Dr. Elena Vasquez walked through the alien crystal forests, where Zephyrian workers grew technology like living organisms. This is incredible, she said to her research partner, a being whose name roughly translated to Song of Growing Light. You're not manufacturing these components, you're cultivating them. Your people showed us that technology can evolve, the Zephyrian replied, its crystalline body shifting through patterns of bioluminescent communication. We applied this principle to our natural abilities. Now we grow weapons that adapt to counter whatever the Empire uses against us. The implications were staggering. Each liberated world brought unique capabilities that enhanced the overall resistance. Kalari provided unmatched mobility and reconnaissance. Zephyrians contributed adaptive technology and energy manipulation. A dozen other species added their own specialties to the growing coalition, but it was the human contribution that tied everything together. Not just technology or tactics, but a fundamental philosophy that transformed how these species thought about their place in the galaxy. General Harrison, now commanding joint human-alien operations, stood before a gathering of resistance leaders from 7 different worlds. The meeting took place in the asteroid belt between former Imperial territories, the location itself a symbol of how the war had changed. Instead of fighting for control of planets, the coalition fought for the freedom to exist between them. The Empire's greatest weakness, he explained to the assembled commanders, is that they see conquest as an end state. They defeat a world and consider it finished, but we see every victory as a beginning, an opportunity to learn, to grow, to become stronger. Wing Commander Shrika of the Kalari clicked her approval. Your species has taught us that defeat is only permanent if you accept it as such. We have been fighting the Empire for generations, but never before with hope of actual victory. The liberation of the mining world Kethmore demonstrated this principle perfectly. Imperial forces had fortified the planet with energy shields and gravity weapons, confident that their defensive perimeter was impregnable. They failed to account for human tactical innovation combined with alien capabilities. Kelari scouts, moving too fast for Imperial sensors to track, identified weak points in the energy shields. Zephyrian technicians grew specialized equipment that could exploit these vulnerabilities. Human tactical coordinators integrated all available intelligence into assault plans that adapted in real time as conditions changed. But the most devastating element was psychological. Imperial defenders found themselves facing an enemy that learned from every exchange of fire, adapted to every defensive measure, and coordinated across multiple species with efficiency that defied their understanding of how military forces should function. The siege broke within hours, not because the coalition overwhelmed Imperial defenses, but because those defenses became irrelevant. The Empire had built fortifications designed to resist traditional assault tactics. They had no answer for an enemy that simply evolved past their defensive measures. Admiral Zektar, recalled from Earth to help coordinate Imperial responses, stood in the Emperor's presence trying to explain the impossible. "Your Majesty, they do not fight like any species we have encountered. They treat warfare as a collaborative learning experience. Every battle makes them more dangerous, not just individually but as a collective. Then we destroy them completely," the Emperor declared. "Sterilize every world they have touched. End this contamination before it spreads further." "Majesty," Zektar's voice carried the weight of terrible knowledge. "We have attempted exactly that. The result was the liberation of 3 more systems and the loss of our 7th fleet. When we destroy human settlements, the survivors become more determined. When we target their allies, more species join their coalition. Our very attempts to end the rebellion make it stronger." The Emperor fell silent, contemplating a reality that challenged everything the Empire had been built upon. For 3 centuries, they had ruled through superior technology and overwhelming force. The concept of an enemy that grew stronger through adversity was as alien to them as they had once been to their human opponents. Meanwhile, in the deep space between star systems, human engineers worked alongside alien specialists to construct something unprecedented: mobile space habitats that could support entire civilizations without being tied to any specific world. These orbital cities became moving symbols of the Coalition's philosophy. Freedom wasn't about controlling territory, but about the right to exist and grow wherever life could flourish. Captain Santos received reports of these developments while her ship patrolled the borders of former Imperial space. Each new innovation, each successful liberation, each species that joined the Coalition added to humanity's understanding of what they were really fighting for. They hadn't set out to destroy an empire. They had simply refused to be enslaved. But in that refusal, they had discovered something that transformed not just themselves but every species they encountered. The understanding that freedom was not a gift to be granted by those in power, but a right to be claimed by those with the courage to fight for it. The imperial capital of Vorth Prime had stood unconquered for 800 years. Its massive orbital platforms and planetary defense grids had never faced a serious challenge. Now, as Emperor Mekthar watched the Coalition fleet emerge from hyperspace, he realized that all of their previous victories had been won against enemies, who fought like the Empire itself with rigid tactics and predictable strategies. The approaching fleet was unlike anything Imperial tacticians had prepared for. Human vessels moved in loose formations that constantly shifted and adapted. Kelari fighters danced through spaces too small for traditional craft. Zephyrian ships seemed to phase in and out of conventional space, their crystalline hulls manipulating electromagnetic fields in ways that defied Imperial understanding. "Fleet strength?" the Emperor demanded. "Approximately 800 vessels of various classes," Grand Admiral Yethron reported. "But Majesty, conventional analysis is meaningless. They're employing technologies and tactics that our simulations cannot predict." The first phase of the assault confirmed these fears. Coalition forces didn't attempt to overwhelm Imperial defenses. Instead, they treated each defensive system as a puzzle to be solved. Human engineers studied shield harmonics while Kelari scouts identified blind spots in sensor networks. Zephyrian technicians grew specialized equipment in real time to counter whatever the Empire deployed against them. Most disturbing of all was their approach to casualties. When Imperial forces destroyed Coalition vessels, the surviving crews transmitted detailed analysis of the weapon systems that had killed them. Instead of demoralizing the attackers, each loss made the Coalition more effective against Imperial defenses. Captain Santos commanded the assault on the outer orbital platforms from the Bridge of New Earth, humanity's most advanced warship. Around her, a mixed crew of humans and aliens worked with efficiency that spoke of months of joint training and mutual respect. Platform 7 is adapting its shield frequency, reported Lieutenant Velric, a Kalari officer who had joined the human crew after the liberation of her homeworld. Recommend switching to kinetic bombardment. Agreed, Santos replied, then opened communications to the Zephyrian vessels. Crystal Fleet, we need electromagnetic interference on Platform 7. Can you disrupt their shield generators? The response came in harmonics that her universal translator converted to enthusiastic agreement. Within minutes, the targeted platform found its shields flickering as crystalline ships sang frequencies that interfered with Imperial technology. On the surface of Vorth Prime, Emperor Mekthar watched his supposedly impregnable defenses crumble under assault from enemies who treated warfare as a collaborative art form. The Coalition didn't just fight his forces, they learned from them, adapted to them, and ultimately made them irrelevant. Majesty, Advisor Keptel approached with obvious fear. We're receiving transmission requests from the human fleet. They wish to discuss terms. The Emperor's mandibles clicked with bitter laughter. Terms? We are the Vorthan Empire. We do not negotiate with rebellious slaves. But even as he spoke, reports continued flooding in of defensive positions falling to tactics that Imperial military doctrine had never encountered. The Coalition forces fought like living organisms, adapting and evolving with each engagement. The transmission activated despite his orders, filling the command chamber with the image of a human female, wearing the insignia of Coalition leadership. Secretary General Maria Santos appeared calm and confident, surrounded by representatives of multiple species. Emperor Mekthar, she began, her tone carrying neither hostility nor deference. I am speaking for the Galactic Liberation Coalition. We offer you the opportunity to surrender your forces and avoid unnecessary bloodshed. Surrender? The Emperor's voice shook with rage. You dare demand the surrender of the greatest empire in galactic history? We're not demanding anything, Santos replied. We're offering you the same choice you gave us. Submit or face the consequences. The difference is that our consequences don't involve slavery or extermination. General Harrison, visible beside Santos, leaned forward. Your Majesty, your empire is already finished. 17 worlds have joined the Coalition. Your remaining territories are in open rebellion. We're not here to destroy you. We're here to offer you a chance to become something better. The concept was so alien to Imperial thinking that several advisors exchanged confused glances. In their experience, conquest led to subjugation or annihilation. The idea that defeat might lead to partnership was literally incomprehensible. What exactly are you proposing? The Emperor asked despite himself. Dr. Elena Vasquez stepped into view, her expression carrying the patience of someone addressing a stubborn student. We're proposing that you join the Coalition as equals. Your people have valuable skills and knowledge. Instead of using them to oppress others, help us build something where every species can thrive. The Vorthan Empire bows to no one. Mekthar roared. And we're not asking you to bow, Santos replied. We're asking you to stand up, to become partners in something greater than any empire. The transmission ended, leaving the Imperial command chamber in stunned silence. Around the Emperor, advisors who had spent their lives enforcing Imperial dominance struggled to process an offer of equality from their supposed inferiors. The assault on Vorth Prime continued, but it followed patterns that defied Imperial understanding. Coalition forces captured strategic positions without destroying them. They disabled Imperial vessels rather than destroying them. Most unnervingly, they offered immediate medical assistance to wounded Imperial personnel. Sub-Admiral Krentok, commanding the defense of the Imperial Naval Academy, found himself in direct communication with human ground forces. This is Captain Liu of the Coalition Marines. We have medical teams standing by to assist your wounded. Will you accept humanitarian aid? The question left Krentok speechless. In 3 centuries of Imperial warfare, no enemy had ever offered to help treat their casualties. The very concept violated everything he understood about the nature of conflict. Why? He finally managed to ask. Because the wounded are no longer combatants, Captain Liu replied. And because we believe that how you treat your enemies says more about who you are than how you treat your allies. This philosophy spread throughout the coalition forces, creating a form of warfare that the Empire had never encountered. Imperial soldiers who surrendered were treated with respect rather than contempt. Captured officers were offered the opportunity to observe coalition operations and understand what they were really fighting for. Many accepted. Commander Thekra, former communications officer of Admiral Zektar's fleet, now worked alongside human engineers studying Imperial technology. Your people, she said to Dr. Tanaka, you fight wars to end them, not to win them. That's exactly right, Tanaka replied. Victory without justice just creates the conditions for the next war. We want to build something that lasts. The final assault on the Imperial Palace complex began at dawn on the 4th day of the siege. Coalition forces had systematically dismantled every layer of defense, not through overwhelming firepower, but through superior understanding of the systems they faced. Emperor Mekthar stood alone in his throne room as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through corridors that had never heard the tread of enemy boots. His guards had surrendered rather than face certain death defending a cause they no longer believed in. The doors opened to admit Secretary General Santos, flanked by representatives of a dozen species that had once been imperial subjects. But instead of the triumphant conquerors he expected, he faced beings who regarded him with something approaching pity. Your Imperial Majesty, Santos said formally, I arrest you in the name of the Galactic Liberation Coalition for crimes against sapient species. You will be given a fair trial and the opportunity to defend your actions. And if I refuse to recognize your authority, Mekthar asked, General Harrison stepped forward. Then you'll sit in a comfortable cell while we rebuild the galaxy without you. Your choice, Your Majesty. Join us in building something better, or watch from the sidelines while we do it anyway. For the first time in his 800-year reign, Emperor Mekthar faced a choice that his absolute power could not influence. The coalition would proceed with or without his cooperation, building their vision of galactic freedom regardless of his preferences. The Vorthan Empire, which had ruled through fear for 3 centuries, fell not to superior force but to a superior idea, that freedom was not something to be granted by those in power, but something to be claimed by those with the courage to reach for it. 6 months after the fall of the imperial capital, the galaxy faced a challenge that no one had anticipated: peace. The Galactic Liberation Coalition controlled most of former imperial space, but victory had created problems that military tactics couldn't solve. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood before the Constitutional Assembly on the orbital station New Harmony, watching delegates from 43 different species attempt to create a government that had never existed before. The meeting chamber itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering: atmospheric zones for different species, universal translators that conveyed not just words but emotional context, and holographic displays that accommodated various forms of sensory perception. The question before us, she addressed the assembly, is not how to rule the galaxy, but how to serve it. Every species here has different needs, different values, different ways of understanding existence itself. Our challenge is to create unity without uniformity. The task was monumentally complex. Kalari delegates spoke in ultrasonic harmonics that required special equipment to translate. Zephyrian representatives communicated through patterns of bioluminescence that conveyed layers of meaning impossible to render in spoken language. Human diplomats found themselves mediating between species whose very concepts of individual versus collective consciousness were fundamentally incompatible. Yet somehow, it was working. Secretary General Maria Santos observed the proceedings from the observation deck, flanked by Admiral Harrison and Captain Maria Chen, who had become the coalition's primary liaison with former Imperial military personnel. Look at them, Santos said quietly. 6 months ago, half these species had never encountered each other, except as fellow victims of Imperial conquest. Now they're debating taxation policy and trade regulations like they've been neighbors for centuries. It's the human approach, Harrison replied. Treat every problem as solvable, every enemy as a potential ally, and every setback as a learning opportunity. Apparently it's contagious. The transformation was visible throughout former Imperial space. Worlds that had been strip-mined for resources now hosted collaborative research stations. Species that had been forbidden from developing technology now shared innovations freely across stellar distances. The rigid hierarchy that had defined imperial civilization had been replaced by networks of voluntary cooperation, but the greatest challenge lay in dealing with the Empire's former ruling class emperor. Mekthar sat in his comfortable detention facility, reading daily reports about the coalition's rebuilding efforts. The accommodation was more luxurious than most imperial citizens had ever experienced. Private quarters, access to entertainment and educational materials, and the freedom to communicate with anyone he chose. It was also a form of psychological warfare more effective than any torture. "You're trying to break me with kindness," he said to Dr. Vasquez. "During one of her regular visits, we're trying to show you what you could have built," she replied. "Your empire ruled through fear because you believed that was the only way to maintain order. We're proving that cooperation is not only possible but more effective." The proof was in the numbers. Industrial production across former imperial space had increased by 300% as species shared resources and expertise. Scientific advancement had accelerated exponentially as research became collaborative, rather than competitive. Most significantly, military spending had plummeted as the need for conquest disappeared. "Your coalition will collapse," Mekthar insisted. "Without a strong central authority, these species will return to fighting among themselves. Chaos is the natural state of the galaxy." "Maybe," Vasquez acknowledged, "but we're willing to try something better. And if we fail, at least we'll fail while reaching for something worth having." The Emperor fell silent, contemplating words that challenged everything he had believed about the nature of power and civilization. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, former Imperial officers faced their own reckonings. Admiral Zektar now commanded a joint human-Vorthan exploration fleet, mapping uncharted regions beyond Imperial borders. His crew included many of the same beings who had once served under him in conquest, now working alongside species they had once oppressed. "Admiral," reported Lieutenant Velshaw, who had remained loyal despite opportunities to transfer to purely Vordan vessels, "we're receiving signals from the unexplored regions. The patterns suggest intelligent origin." Zektar studied the data with interest rather than the predatory calculation that had once driven Imperial expansion. The Coalition's exploration protocols were fundamentally different from Imperial survey. Missions contact was made through communication and cultural exchange rather than overwhelming force. "Signal the fleet," he commanded. "We approach peacefully and observe. If these beings wish contact, we offer friendship. If they prefer isolation, we respect their choice." The statement would have been incomprehensible to his former self, but months of working alongside coalition crews had taught him that strength came not from domination, but from voluntary cooperation. The first contact with the ethereal collective, beings of pure energy who existed in the space between stars, proved this philosophy correct. Imperial doctrine would have dismissed them as non-material entities unworthy of consideration. Coalition protocols recognized them as a form of life-deserving respect and potentially valuable as allies. The ethereals, in turn, shared knowledge of galactic phenomena that revolutionized coalition understanding of faster-than-light travel and energy manipulation. The exchange was voluntary, beneficial to all parties, and established yet another model for how diverse species could interact without conquest or subjugation. Back on New Harmony, the Constitutional Assembly reached its first major milestone, a declaration of galactic rights that established fundamental principles for all member species. The document was a masterpiece of cooperative philosophy, guaranteeing not just freedom from oppression but the positive right to grow, explore, and contribute to galactic civilization. "We hold these truths to be universal," read the preamble, "that all sapient beings are created with inherent dignity, that they are endowed with inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of understanding, and that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed." The words echoed human constitutional tradition, but the document itself reflected contributions from every member species. Kellery concepts of collective decision-making, balanced human individualism, Zephyrian insights into organic growth informed approaches to economic development. Even former imperial administrative expertise contributed to practical governance structures. Most remarkably, delegates from the Vorton species had been among the most enthusiastic contributors to the process. Freed from the burden of maintaining imperial dominance, they proved to be natural organizers and administrators when their skills served liberation rather than oppression. Commander Thekra, now serving as liaison between Vorthon civilians and coalition leadership, addressed the assembly on behalf of her people. For 3 centuries, we defined ourselves through conquest and control. We believed that strength meant making others weak. The coalition has shown us that true strength means lifting others up. The transformation wasn't complete or universal. Some former imperial worlds struggled with the transition from authoritarian rule to democratic self-governance. Refugee populations displaced by centuries of conquest required massive humanitarian efforts. Economic systems built on exploitation needed fundamental restructuring, but across the galaxy, something unprecedented was taking shape. A civilization based on cooperation rather than conquest, diversity rather than uniformity, and growth rather than domination. Dr. Vasquez returned to Emperor Mekthar's quarters with a proposal that would have been unthinkable months earlier. Your Majesty, the Constitutional Assembly has voted to offer you a position as an advisor on governmental transition. Your administrative experience could help former imperial worlds adapt to democratic governance. The Emperor stared at her in silence for long moments. You want me to help destroy everything I built? We want you to help build something better, she corrected. The choice is yours. Continue to watch from the sidelines or help shape what comes next. For the first time since his capture, Emperor Mekthar smiled, not with his former arrogance, but with something approaching hope. Perhaps, he said slowly, it is time to learn what it means to serve rather than rule. The galaxy was transforming, and even its former tyrant was beginning to understand that the coalition offered something more valuable than power. It offered purpose. 10 years after the first human resistance to Vorthon invasion, the galaxy had become unrecognizable. Where imperial warships once enforced brutal submission, joint exploration fleets now sought out new forms of life to welcome into an ever-expanding coalition of free worlds. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Unity, humanity's most advanced vessel, watching her mixed crew of 12 different species work with seamless cooperation. The ship itself embodied the coalition's philosophy: human engineering integrated with Kalari mobility systems, Zephyrian energy manipulation, and innovations from dozens of other species. Captain, reported Navigator Shrika, the Kalari officer whose great aunt had been among the first to join human resistance efforts. We're approaching the coordinates provided by the Ethereal Collective. Initial scans suggest a massive artificial structure. The structure that appeared on their screens defied easy description. Spanning hundreds of kilometers, it seemed part space station, part organism, and part work of art. Geometric patterns flowed into organic curves while energy streams created patterns of impossible beauty. It's an archive, whispered Dr. Elena Vasquez, now the coalition's chief xenoanthropologist. The Ethereals said we would know when we found it. The ancient repository, as it came to be known, contained the collected knowledge of 47 extinct civilizations. Species that had risen to greatness and fallen to conquest, natural disaster, or their own mistakes had left behind their wisdom in crystalline matrices that defied conventional understanding. But the repository's greatest revelation wasn't technological. It was historical. Every civilization recorded in its archives had faced the same choice that currently confronted the galaxy: evolve into something greater than the sum of their parts, or fragment back into isolated tribes fighting for limited resources. According to these records, Vasquez reported to the Coalition Council via quantum communication, only 3 previous galactic civilizations achieved true unity. 2 of them eventually transcended physical existence entirely. The third, she paused, studying the data with wonder. The third became something we don't have words for yet. The implications were staggering. The coalition wasn't just rebuilding imperial space, they were participating in a pattern of galactic evolution that had played out across millions of years. They stood at a threshold that most civilizations never reached. On New Harmony, the Coalition Council absorbed this information with the gravity it deserved. Representatives from 67 species now gathered in the assembly halls, including delegations from worlds that had voluntarily petitioned to join after witnessing the coalition's approach to interspecies cooperation. Secretary General Santos, now in her second term by unanimous re-election, addressed the assembled delegates. We face a choice that will define not just our future, but the future of the galaxy itself. The repository shows us that unity is possible, but it requires us to move beyond even our current understanding of cooperation. Emperor Mekthar, now serving as senior advisor for governmental transition, stood to address the assembly. His transformation over the past decade had been remarkable, from absolute dictator to dedicated public servant. Your Excellencies, I've spent my life believing that order required control, that peace required conquest. The coalition has proven that the opposite is true. True order emerges from voluntary cooperation. Lasting peace comes from justice, not dominance. The former emperor's words carried special weight because his conversion had been so complete. Worlds that might have resented coalition rule found themselves governed by reformed imperial administrators who had learned to serve rather than command. The transition had been so successful that many former imperial citizens reported higher satisfaction with their lives than they had experienced under the empire. But the coalition's greatest test came from an unexpected source, their own success. Reports reached new harmony of expansion beyond all projected parameters. New species contacted the coalition daily, seeking membership or alliance. Trade networks spanned previously impossible distances. Scientific cooperation had achieved breakthroughs that individual civilizations could never have accomplished alone. The challenge was philosophical as much as practical. How large could a voluntary association become before it lost the intimate cooperation that made it work? How could they maintain their principles while administering a territory larger than any empire in galactic history? Dr. Vasquez proposed a solution inspired by humanity's most successful institutions. We don't govern the galaxy, she explained to the council. We teach it to govern itself. Each region, each sector, each world maintains its autonomy while participating in larger networks of mutual support. The nested democracy model, as historians would later call it, created governance structures at every level from planetary to galactic. Local communities handled their own affairs while participating in larger associations that addressed regional challenges. Those associations, in turn, belonged to sector-wide confederations that managed interstellar concerns. At the galactic level, the Coalition Council focused not on rule but on service, facilitating communication, mediating disputes, coordinating responses to crises, and ensuring that the principles of freedom and cooperation were maintained throughout the network. The system worked because it embodied the lesson humans had learned. During their first resistance to imperial conquest, strength came not from control but from adaptation, not from dominance but from cooperation. Admiral Zektar, now commanding the Joint Exploration Command, reported back from the galaxy's outer rim with news that validated this approach. We've made contact with the Transcendent Builders, the civilization that created the repository. They've been watching our development for the past decade. The Transcendent Builders were beings of such advanced development that they existed partially outside normal space-time. Their message to the Coalition was simple but profound. You have chosen correctly. The next phase of your evolution awaits when you are ready. But they refused to specify what that evolution might entail. Each species must discover its own path to transcendence, their ambassador explained. We can offer guidance, but the journey itself cannot be given. It must be earned. The Coalition's response was characteristically human in its approach. They treated transcendence as a challenge to be met through cooperation and learning. Research stations began studying the interface between physical and non-physical existence. Meditation centers emerged where beings from different species shared spiritual practices. Artists created works that explored the boundaries of consciousness itself. Meanwhile, the practical work of galactic civilization continued. Former imperial slave worlds became centers of learning and innovation. Species that had been forbidden from developing technology now contributed breakthrough discoveries. The galaxy's economy shifted from extraction and exploitation to creation and cooperation. On Earth, now one of hundreds of coalition worlds rather than humanity's lone home, children learned galactic history in schools where their classmates might include young Kellari, Zephyrians, or dozens of other species. The old human concept of diversity had expanded to encompass forms of life that earlier generations could never have imagined. Captain Chen, approaching the end of her deep space mission, received a message that perfectly captured the transformation of galactic civilization. It came from a newly contacted species in the Andromeda Arm, beings who had received coalition broadcasts and wanted to establish peaceful relations. "We have watched the growth of your coalition with great interest," the message read. "For the first time in our recorded history, we observe a galactic civilization that expands through invitation rather than conquest. We request permission to learn from your example and perhaps, if we prove worthy, to join your community of free worlds." As Chen prepared her response, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. It had begun with humanity's simple refusal to accept slavery. That refusal had sparked a revolution that liberated dozens of species, toppled an empire, and now inspired civilizations across multiple galaxies. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was in how they understood strength itself. The humans who had first faced Vorthan invasion had believed they were fighting for survival. They discovered they were fighting for something far more precious, the right of all sapient beings to grow, to explore, and to contribute to something greater than themselves. The galaxy no longer pleaded for mercy from its conquerors. Instead, it sang with the voices of free beings, creating something unprecedented in cosmic history. A civilization based not on the dominance of the strong, but on the cooperation of the willing. And in the deep spaces between the stars, the transcendent builders watched with approval as another species took its first steps toward a destiny that even they could not fully comprehend. The humans had proven that evolution was not just about becoming stronger, it was about becoming better. And in teaching that lesson to the galaxy, they had perhaps taught it to the universe itself.